"Hush," said the cabbie. They all listened. In the darkness, something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Diggory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself. There were no words. There was hardly even a tune. But it was, beyond comparison, the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. I love the way C.S. Lewis describes the creation of Narnia in his book The Magician's Nephew. Aslan himself sings creation into being, and what I find interesting is that each part of the creation has a different sound, but that each and every sound plays a part to make a whole song. I think this is similar to the creation narrative that we see in Genesis. Actually, at each stage, God says it's good. He makes the sun, moon and stars. It is good. He makes the fish. They're good. He makes the plants and the trees. They're good. There's one exception to that, when Adam is on his own. And actually, God creates Eve as a companion for Adam, and then creation is good. And when God steps back at the end of the whole thing, he says it is very good, and he's pleased. Now, I think rightly so, we often think of humanity as the crescendo, the swell, the moment of music where it comes together. And that's right, human beings are the image bearers of God. But actually, sometimes we forget that the rest of the song makes up, the rest of the parts that have come together make up the whole good creation. Aquinas didn't believe that there was such a thing as environmental sin. He said that animals were subject to human beings. Actually, I don't really think the Bible says that. I think there are 4 things that are significant. Firstly, that God mentions in his Sabbath law that animals and the land are also subject to the rest as well. It's not just for human beings. And actually that's significant. So God recognises that animals and the land needs a rest. Secondly, he mentions in his year of Jubilee, actually the land goes back to where it originally belonged. This tells us that we shouldn't be taking more from the land than we're allowed. We should be relying on God more and not being greedy. God shows us consistently that he cares about animals. Jesus in Luke talks about the sparrows and how significant they are and how important they are to God. And they're the plainest of the birds. Actually, how important are human beings, but also the other animals that God has created. And he also talks about, regularly the Bible talks about conservation. So actually, in Deuteronomy, God says, when you destroy the cities, leave the trees. God's creation is important. Now, I think the picture that the Bible shows me is that creation is important, the land is important, but my theology is best when it's applied. So recently, in the last few years, I've made a really big difference to try and treat the earth better. I've done things like go to shampoo bars and reducing my plastic. I think it's a challenge to all of us about how we can look after the earth better together.